Hi, everyone. This is Katie Buss. This is Chapter 11, the reproductive system or the reproductive systems, since we have one male and one female system. And this is for medical terminology, HLT 110. All right, so let's talk about your sex organs. All right, the major function of the male and female reproductive systems is procreation, right? To reproduce and make a new human. The two systems work in a complementary fashion to join a sperm and an egg at the moment of conception. So the sperm is from the male, the egg is from the female. Flashpoint, there are approximately 20 million sperm in a normal sample, and you only need one to fertilize an egg. It's pretty cool. Okay, so the male reproductive system, we're going to talk about that one first. It shares some structures with other body systems. So particularly the urinary system. So the penis and the urethra are shared by the urinary system, and the testes are shared by the endocrine system. This slide is just showing some of the main organs and structures of the male reproductive system. Obviously, the penis is the male genital organ. It carries the tube or the ducts that transfers sperm during copulation, which means sexual intercourse. It consists largely of erectile tissue that can fill with blood and harden and stand erect, and also serves for the elimination of urine. So in the male, the duct or tube throughout the penis is for both reproductive stuff as well as urine. So they share that tube, whereas in the female body, that does not happen. So the urethra is the duct by which urine, that's supposed to say carried out from the body, carried out of the body from the bladder, okay? And then males also have the testes. Okay, these are the organs that actually produce the sperm. The spermatozoa, those are the male reproductive cells. So the male reproductive system shares the testes with the endocrine system, because remember, the endocrine system creates hormones or releases hormones. Okay, so testosterone is a hormone that the endocrine system releases that is very important in the male reproductive system. The males also have a prostate gland. This is a gland that kind of surrounds like the very base of the bladder where the ureter comes out. There is this gland that kind of surrounds it. So they say it like surrounds the neck of the bladder. And that releases something called prostatic fluid. But as men age, sometimes they have issues with that prostate gland becoming swollen, and then it kind of cuts off the ureter, so they have trouble, urinating. The testes are held inside a pouch of skin called the scrotum, and so you can call these testicles or testes, and a testis is one of them, right? And then we have a lot of ducts or tubes or passageways in the male system, as well as glands, right? And they secrete hormones. So the function of the male reproductive system is to produce sperm, deliver sperm into the female reproductive tract, and then also secrete male sex hormones. All right, so we're going to zoom in here on the testicle. The testes are located inside the scrotum. The scrotum is the skin sac, right? Testes have two layers. They have an outer capsule and an inner part that we call the seminiferous tubules. So these are all your seminiferous tubules, these little yellow things here. And then we have our outer capsule. Spermatogenesis occurs in these seminiferous tubules. That means creation of sperm cells. Okay, so that is where these are created. And then spermatocytes are the cells themselves. So spermatocytes are male reproductive cells. Your testes are basically just oval shaped structures and they're made of thick white connective tissue. And that inner part, it actually divided into like 200 to 300 lobes, right? That's a lot of lobes in there with those seminiferous tubules. All right. Remember that when the male gives his sperm, remember that the sperm only carries half of the genetic material or DNA needed to create another human, whereas then the other half of the DNA will come from the female reproductive system. So the egg carries half your DNA, the sperm carries half, you come together, and then you get the appropriate amount of chromosomes and DNA. Another thing to note about the male reproductive system is that it's very sensitive to heat, and it has to live within an environment that is slightly below normal body temperature, which if you think about it, makes sense that the testes are not located inside the body. They're located on the outside so that they do not heat up to the level of the body. Prior to birth, the testes in the male fetus normally descend from the lower abdomen into the scrotum. So the testes don't descend until later in gestation or near birth. And sometimes they actually descend late or don't descend at all in, more rare circumstances. But when they do, obviously they look like this, right? Okay, so the scrotum, that's what you would see, right? You're not going to actually see the testes because they're inside the scrotum. It's composed of two internal compartments, right? Surrounded by connective tissue and a smooth muscle layer. So do you see this right here? That is a muscle layer, and that kind of protects the area there. And then this white stuff's just connective tissue to, hold it all together, make it sturdy. Okay. And you have a second muscle group called the cremasters, which are these here, and they actually kind of surround the testicle and come all the way up to the lower abdomen area. And again, that's to support the entire scrotum area. And again, and they also help maintain body temperature. So for spermatogenesis to occur, the creation of new sperm cells, we have to have an optimal temperature. It can't be too cold or it can't be too hot. So the scrotum is kind of designed to help regulate temperature. In a cold environment, the smooth muscle of the scrotum and the cremaster muscles contract, bringing the scrotum and the testicles closer to the body to keep them warmer. And then in a warm environment, those same muscles will relax and allow the scrotum and testes to descend away from the body to keep them cooler. All right. So when spermatocytes have reached a sufficient stage of maturity, they exit the testes through a series of ducts, beginning with the seminiferous tubules. And so we're going to look at that pathway. So this is an illustration of a single testes, right, or a testicle. And we can see, here's our seminiferous tubules. This is where sperm is created, right? And then this is the pathway they will take to exit the male reproductive system. So we're going to start here with the seminiferous tubules, right? Then the sperm moves into this area called your reedy testes, right? And then they'll go through these little things called efferent ductules, right? Little just tiny passages or ducts. And then though they reach the head of the epididymis here. This whole thing is your epididymis. So they come out here and then they travel down the epididymis. They call this the tail of the epididymis. And then in this figure, your vas deferens is behind the testicles. You can't see it, but this tube right here connects right there. And so the end of the tail of your epididymis kind of turns into your vas deferens. It's just a duct or a passageway that those sperm cells are going to travel. Okay, so basically they are created here in the seminiferous tubules. They go into the reedy testes, through the efferent ducts to the head of the epididymis, down the epididymis, right, to the tail, and then up the vas deferens, and then eventually to the ejaculatory duct. Okay, and we'll look at that in a minute. The penis itself is composed of, the penis itself is composed of 3 sections of erectile tissue. So, oh, sorry, I'm going to come back to that. What I wanted to show you right here was I zoomed out a little bit so that you could see the whole picture and how it relates to the male body. So again, here's a picture of the seminiferous tubules. They go through the reedy testes into the my efferent ducts, and then to the epididymis, and then down the epididymis to the tail and into the vas deferens. So we pick that up here, and you can see here's the epididymis, right? The sperm will go through here, the vas deferens, and all the way down to where it meets with the seminal vesicle. This is where semen is produced, or seminal fluid is produced, right? And it is excreted when the male ejaculates. And so then they come together now, and this becomes the ejaculatory duct, right? From here all the way to here, it's your vas deferens. And then when it meets up with the seminal vesicle secretes seminal fluid, and the sperm is coming through here. They mix and create semen. So when it's just semen, it's just them mixing together. And then we just call this duct now your ejaculatory duct. And then here you'll see that it will actually meet up with your ureters, right? And then this is where the male reproductive system and the male urinary system meet and join up, right? And then they both will have to exit through the penis. So this is just one more close up to show you, here is where the seminal vesicle is, and this is where right here, can you see it? And then it secretes that seminal fluid into this area, right, called your ejaculatory duct. And then here is where that meets up with your urethra, and then it goes down out to the penis. And then here I wanted to show you was the prostate. And this picture, it almost looks like an apple, but see how it surrounds your urethra. And I think I called this a ureter earlier. It's your urethra. The ureter is going from the kidney to the bladder. Urethra is coming out from the bladder to the penis. So anyway, and this is where they join up and share. They share that duct. All right, so let me go back and make sure I've covered everything. Lastly, they do share this duct, but they don't share it at the same time, right? So during sexual activity, you have an actual little internal urinary sphincter that actually contracts to keep semen from entering the bladder and to keep urine from exiting the bladder. So you have a sphincter that will contract so that they won't mix. All right. So we're going to talk about the areas of the penis. We obviously have the penis here has like the root where it's kind of attached and coming out of the body. You have the body of the penis, and then the head of the penis they call the glans penis. Okay. So it is composed of 3 sections of erectile tissue. 1, 2, 3. Okay. And so these 2 are called your corpus cavernosum. And then this one is your corpus spongiosum. And what these do is they're able to fill with blood, and the blood will cause them to, harden and sturdy and be able to stand erect. The rounded end is called the glans penis, which is the head of the penis here. And then you have a fold of skin or foreskin that will cover the head of the penis if the male has not been circumcised. And if they have, that is when they take this fold of skin here and remove it, called circumcision. And male circumcision is usually performed for cultural, religious, or social reasons. Many people feel that it is unnecessary and it's a risky surgical procedure. And recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics concluded that the health benefits associated with circumcision outweigh the risks of the procedure. So they are saying that it's kind of worth it, because what happens is that bacteria and things can get trapped in there and cause infections and issues. And so they're usually just going to suggest you do it. It's very common here in the United States, but it doesn't have to be done. Okay, so in the male reproductive system, we know that they have sexual arousal, and that's necessary to ejaculate, right? So the sexual arousal that they feel causes erectile tissue of the penis to engorge with blood. It becomes firm and erect, and that allows it to facilitate that sexual intercourse, and then eventually ejaculation, where that seminal fluid or semen is released into the female reproductive tract. Okay, so secretions that contribute to seminal fluid. We have the bulbourethral gland and the inner urethral wall. These are mucus filled. These mucus fluids lubricate the urethra and neutralize the normal acidic environment. So because the male ejaculatory tract shares that, they come together with the urinary tract can be really acidic. And so during ejaculation and sexual arousal, this bulbourethral gland and the inner urethral wall will secrete mucus or fluid that will lubricate and neutralize that acid, right? And so that mucus kind of contributes to that seminal fluid. The actual seminal vesicle that we talked about, it secretes fructose and other nutrients for your sperm cell, as well as prostaglandin. And prostaglandin it's a hormone that stimulates smooth muscle contractions in the female reproductive tract. So this is thought to help move sperm through the female reproductive tract. That's kind of weird and crazy, right? So that the male body produces this hormone, and when it is ejected into the female, it actually stimulates contractions in the female reproductive tract to help that sperm move up in the correct position in order to unite, right? It's kind of crazy. The prostate gland secretes prostatic fluid that helps create a more alkaline environment for sperm. Sperm mobility, particularly, that is how the sperm move. If they have poor mobility, they don't, swim well. All right, so that's just all of the things that kind of contribute to that seminal fluid that is being ejected when they ejaculate. And sperm are the reproductive cells in the semen. The semen is the fluid altogether. The sperm is just the actual cells. So yeah. All right. That is the end of the male reproductive system. Let's talk about the female reproductive system. That is very simple as far as anatomy, but much more, it has a lot more variety. It does a lot more things. All right, the female reproductive system is made of internal and external structures. The primary function of the female reproductive system is to bear offspring or to produce another human being. The internal and external organs and structures of the female reproductive system all function towards achieving this ultimate goal. The female reproductive system also manufactures hormones or chemicals that are secreted into the bloodstream that cause bodily reactions. And these are all reactions that are necessary for the development and functioning of the reproductive organs. And when we talk about reproductive organs in the female, it's not just the uterus, it is the breast as well. Sorry, my mouse goes away when I pause for a second. All right, the main organs and structures of the female reproductive system include your ovaries, right? It's a pair of female glands in which the eggs form and the female hormone estrogen and progesterone are made. And your eggs are actually created and there by the time that you are born. So you have all of the eggs that you're going to have for your lifetime in your ovaries when you are born. And that's different than the male. Males produce sperm throughout most of the life, well, from puberty on until, they no longer can ejaculate. But the female eggs are there your entire life, right? So that's why as females age, the eggs become, older and, and less, whatever. So it's a little bit different. It's harder for females to reproduce at an older age versus males. We also have the fallopian tubes. There are two of them, long, slender tubes that connect the ovaries to the uterus. And I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. The uterus is a hollow, pear-shaped organ in your pelvis. The uterus is where a fetus or an unborn baby will develop and grow. It is often called your womb. The cervix is the lower narrow part of the uterus and connects the main body of the uterus to the vagina or your birth canal. And then the vagina, the birth canal, is a muscular canal that extends from the vulva, which is the outside of your vaginal area, to the cervix. The vagina is where the lining of the uterus is shed during menstruation, where penetration can occur during sex, and where the baby descends during childbirth. So here we can kind of see the anatomy of the female reproductive system. Here is our uterus. Here is the cervix, right? And then here is the vagina, right? So the cervix connects the uterus and the vagina. Here are the ovaries, and then here are my fallopian tubes. So here are your ovaries where your eggs are stored your entire life. They release an egg, usually each month, and oftentimes they will right side, then the next month left side, vice versa. And these fallopian tubes will sweep the egg in, it will travel down into the uterus. All right. And so this egg is here. And if you are not impregnated, then, you will menstruate and it will leave the body. However, if sperm were to come up here and meet with that egg, they can fertilize, it can be fertilized. And then that new fertilized egg will burrow into the uterine lining somewhere. Now, hopefully that happens in an area, here. You don't want it to happen in other areas, because that is going to end up being a pregnancy that will not survive and or dangerous for you. So it's happened before where, a sperm and an egg met higher up here and planted here or here or here or here. And so that can be really dangerous. The other thing that's not so great is if it implants here and the placenta starts to grow here, because we don't want that either. So anyway, ovaries are the sex hormones in females. They contain Graafian follicles, which are just those immature eggs. They're released when they mature. Around every 28 days, a mature ovum, which is basically your egg, is produced and released. And these ovaries also produce estrogen and progesterone. Now, with that being said, remember, males produce testosterone as their primary sex hormone, but they also produce levels of estrogen and progesterone, just not as much as the female. And the opposite is also true. Females also produce testosterone, just not as much as males. So both sexes have all of these hormones. And one thing I wanted to show you on this picture, which I like, because you don't often see this in many illustrations of the female reproductive system. This right here, you see this looks like a banana or a wing. This is a ligament that holds the ovaries and fallopian tubes in place, so they're not just flinging all over the place. So they are attached to this ligament called your broad ligament that help hold everything into this shape. All right. Your fallopian tubes, I zoomed in here, your fallopian tubes extend from the uterus to the ovary, but they don't actually touch, it kind of just hovers. And it's attached to that broad ligament to keep it supported. And then these little fimbriae, these little like weird looking tentacle things, when the egg is released, they kind of sweep the egg into the fallopian tube. Okay, so they help direct that egg or that ovum into the fallopian tube. The ovary secretes estrogen and progesterone, and both of those can actually change the endometrial lining of the uterus in order to help it become more receptive to implantation. And so that's why your hormone levels will change throughout your menstrual cycle, because your body will actually release more during the time that you're going to ovulate, because the body naturally wants to procreate, right? Moving on, we have the external structures of the female reproductive system, also called the vulva. It includes the clitoris, the urethral meatus, the labia, the mons pubis. What else do I have here? Okay. Actually, I missed a part. I missed the slide. So I'll come back to that. Lastly, I just want to talk about the uterus real quick, and then I'll go back to the external organs we were talking about a second ago. So your uterus is a thick muscular organ. It's kind of just right behind the bladder and in front of your rectum. It has a fundus, which is the top kind of rounded area. The corpus is the whole body of the uterus, right? The corpus here. And then the cervix is the low part right here, the bottom narrow section that opens up into the vagina. Now, this is what has to dilate in order to have a child. Dilate means to open, so the cervix will open. The other thing it has to do is to efface, which means to thin 100%. So then when when you're having a baby, this cervix will be completely thin and moved out to the side so that the baby can come out. And then you have a couple layers inside your uterine wall here. You have your endometrium, and then you have the myometrium. So the myometrium is myo means muscle. So this is the muscular wall. And then the endo usually means inside lining of the uterus. All right, now we're going to move on to the external structures. Sorry about that. So these were the things I was talking about. So you also have the Bartholin's gland, and then your perineum. The perineum is just the space between the vulva and the anus, right? You have some glands here that will secrete lubrication so that the vagina is not dry, right? The mons pubis is just the fatty pad up here. It's basically covers the pubic bone, and it often is what grows where your pubic hair grows. The labia are the two lips, and we've also heard that word before in a previous chapter, because the lips on your face are also labia, right? That just means lip. Okay, they cover and protect the clitoris, the urethral meatus, and the vaginal opening. And so urethral, right, that means it must be going to the bladder. and then the bladder to the kidneys. And remember that meatus is like an opening or a tube. So that's the tube going where the urine will come out, right? And so that is why we have those labia there to protect and cover all of those things. Obviously, the clitoris is the female orgasm structure. It does actually, their tissue can become more erect, and it responds to stimulus, causing an orgasm. And then you have the vulva, which is the entire just external area here. Okay, and again, we have breast tissue. So puberty will increase secretions of estrogen, and that is what's going to cause breast tissue to develop. Obviously, we have the areola, which is the pigmented or colored area around the nipple. And then you have, and the areola has little nodules on it. And those nodules help babies feel right where they need to be. The nipples, obviously, the small center in the middle of the areola where milk can come out during breastfeeding. And you have glands. You have like 15 to 20 lobes of glandular tissue, including mammary glands that will make the milk. So we have a lot of mammary glands in here that will secrete milk during after childbirth. You have also connective tissue in here. You need to have connective tissue to kind of hold everything together. Okay. And over time, obviously, this connective tissue does stretch, which is, because it's carrying this load. And so eventually over time, that's why they can sag a little bit. And it also has a bunch of fat in there, and it provides insulation for these glands. So the role of the breast is for reproduction, is for nourishing a neonate, which is a newborn, with breast milk in a process called lactation. That is the purpose of breasts. A couple of other things real quick to just talk about that. Obviously, the mammary glands of the breast produce milk, but during pregnancy, the breasts respond to 4 different hormones. And so these 4 different hormones do something. So estrogen will increase the breast size. Progesterone will stimulate the development of the duct system for lactation. Prolactin will stimulate milk production, and oxytocin promotes the flow of milk from the glands to the nipple. So there's a lot of hormones in this area during the process, before, during, and after childbirth. All right, let's talk about female reproductive cycle. Obviously, this is your menstruation cycle. So it usually runs on a 28-day system. Not everybody's exactly the same, but the female reproductive system follows a cycle that parallels the lifespan. The cycle includes menarche, menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth for some women who have children, and then menopause. So menarche is the onset of menstruation. That is basically a puberty, when a woman first gets her period. Usually occurs in those adolescent females around the age of 13. However, over the last couple decades, it's been happening earlier and earlier. Females are getting periods earlier, like 9-year-olds. And I think there's still a lot of controversy over why, but the majority of the consensus is that we have so many hormones that we're taking in from milk and, animals and things like that, that women or, adolescents are getting their periods earlier. And then menstruation, also called your menstrual cycle or menses, occurs approximately every 28 days, but it does vary. During menstruation, the uterus sheds the layer of endometrial tissue that develops each month in preparation for pregnancy. So literally, your body every single month builds up tissue just to prepare for pregnancy. Now, if you look closely, there are little vessels, right? Blood vessels that have to feed this tissue. And so when you menstruate, this lining is shed, and it literally has to rip these blood vessels out and shed all of this. That's why we have cramps, because you're actually ripping tissue away and shedding it. So you feel that, right? Phases, there's phases of your 28-day cycle, and they include the follicular phase, the luteal phase, and the menstrual phases. During the follicular phase, the hypothalamus in your brain secretes a hormone that stimulates another part of your pituitary gland to secrete the follicle stimulating hormone, which is abbreviated as FSH, and LH, luteinizing hormone. So basically, your pituitary gland releases hormones that stimulate your Graafian follicles within the ovaries to secrete estrogen. That stimulates the growth and thickening of the endometrium. Between day 9 and 14, the ripened Graafian follicle ruptures out of the ovarian wall and begins to secrete the hormone progesterone. So some women know when they're ovulating because they experience mild to moderate sharp pain on the side of their ovulating ovary. So not only do you feel your uterine lining, your endometrium shedding, you can also feel ovulation sometimes, wherein the egg is being released from the ovary. And then the next month, you may notice it on the other side, because generally your ovaries like to switch on and off. Then we have the luteal phase. This is where the ovum or the cell is propelled forward or towards the fallopian tube with the help of that wave-like action of the fimbriae. During this phase, progesterone produces the corpus luteum, the remainder of the follicle after the woman ovulates. It continues to cause extensive growth of the functional layer of the endometrium. If fertilization of the ovum, also called conception, occurs, the corpus luteum will secrete HCG. That is the pregnancy hormone that is picked up on pregnancy tests. If no conception occurs, the corpus luteum does not secrete HCG, but instead atrophies. Remember what that means? It means A means without, trophy means growth and nourishment. So without nourishment, it kind of deteriorates, right? It atrophies into a mass of fibrous tissue called the corpus albicans. I forgot how to say that one. And so we're just looking at the life cycle of the egg. That's all we're doing here. So this figure is just a lot easier to understand what I'm trying to say here. So here's where you're menstruating, and then you're done menstruating, it starts again. So the follicular phase, your endometrium is building, you're going to be ovulating, and then we go to the luteal phase, right, where your body is very prepared for implantation, right? And here's what's happening to this egg at the same time. And here is where we would end up with conception if there's sperm available. And if not, then this is the lifespan of that egg, right? Until I start to menstruate again, and then the lining is shed. And so I like this figure just because it shows what's happening to the egg at this point, and then what's happening in your cycle at this point. So this is just a more simple explanation here. The third and final phase of menstruation is the actual menstruation phase. That's where the uterus lining sheds. It usually lasts 5 to 7 days for most people. But what if fertilization occurs? Okay, so fertilization is when the sperm penetrates the egg. So the sperm is present and it penetrates the egg, okay? We form a zygote. 23, it's basically an egg. Or a tiny, tiny little organism. It has 23 chromosomes from the sperm and 23 from the ovum. And then that little zygote will travel into the uterus and then eventually implant into that uterine wall where it grows into a fetus. As it's growing, it will be inside of a gestational sac that will form in the very early stages, which is just basically your amniotic sac that holds that baby in. And then you'll also form a placenta, and it's kind of like its own organ, and that will be attached to your uterine wall. The umbilical cord leaves the placenta and goes into the gestational sac and into the infant's umbilical area to feed it with nutrients and oxygen. Now, I just thought this was super interesting. Look at the odds of ovulation or a pregnancy. So you have, you know, after your period, you have 99% odds that you're going to ovulate, right? And if you ovulate, you have 56% odds of it being fertilized. I mean, if you were either trying or not trying, but if you're purposely trying, obviously those odds are probably a little higher, but this is just random, right? So you have 56% chance of it being fertilized. Then you have a 30% chance of it implanting. So this is the area right here where the odds are lower, right? They're kind of against you, especially if you're trying to get pregnant. Once you get implantation though, the odds go up dramatically. So once this implants, you have a 76% chance of it growing into an embryo, and then an 89% chance of it growing into a fetus. And then after that, 99% odds of having a baby. So I just thought that was really interesting there. Just wanted to put this figure up here. It's showing the phases of implantation and then embryo growth, right? So here is the egg that has been fertilized, and then it just literally starts to divide and divide and divide until eventually it kind of splits, right? And then this becomes one thing, this becomes the other. And then at first, it does not look like a human, right? It looks very strange. And then eventually, as the weeks go on, it will, you know, develop and look more and more human-like. All right, so we got to talk about the pregnancy itself, right? We have pregnancy is also called gestation. We have 3 trimesters, and trimesters are just periods of time. And these might be slightly off depending on what you look at, but you have your first trimester, which is usually around the first 3 months. Second trimester, usually around months 4 to 6. Third trimester, usually around months 7 to 9. And so the first trimester, that zygote becomes an embryo, then a fetus. It's developing all of its tissues and organs, and its heart begins to beat. Second trimester, the uterus will start to really expand and rise above your umbilicus area. So you're going to start to notice or be able to see that you're pregnant. The baby begins to blink and hear. Mother can feel movement at this point. Again, the baby's organs are just developing further and further. And then the third trimester, there are a lot of the organs are fully functioning at this point. So the fetus is just growing, adding more fat. The lungs are still developing. The lungs are the last things to develop. And at this point is usually when the testes drop in males. Remember that we have an umbilical cord that connects the fetus to the placenta. So here's this little cord here, and that's how it is nourished. Okay. I just like this chart because it kind of just goes through the different things that are happening, you know, approximately by week in a pregnancy. And then we have the stages of labor, the birthing process. So stage 1, active labor starts. Active labor starts with dilation and effacement. So some people will say, I'm going into labor, and we don't really call it active labor until your cervix starts to dilate and efface. So a lot of times they'll say, oh, stay home until you're in active labor. And that's what they're talking about here. What triggers active labor? What triggers your cervix to start to dilate and efface? It can be triggered by a few things. It could be the loss of a mucus plug. You have a mucus plug that kind of serves to keep bacteria out, but you can lose this a week, you know, ahead or right as you're having a baby. So that one's not usually the trigger. Contractions, you might start to have a contraction that can cause dilation. Your amniotic sac breaks or your water breaks that can cause dilation and contractions. You want to make sure people are aware of false labor contraction called Braxton Hicks. And those are not true labor contractions. That is the uterus kind of practicing. There are, you know, if the doctor will usually go through those with you, but usually there are signs that they are false. And the biggest signs is that they are not consistent. They don't consistently get stronger over time, and they're not at regular intervals. So if you're going into active labor, it usually starts with contractions that become more and more and more and more and more intense over time, right? And they're consistent in time intervals, and those time intervals start getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So with Braxton Hicks, they're just random. One might be really strong, one might be really weak. Once they're 30 seconds apart, then they're 10 minutes apart. So that's usually an indication that those are not real contractions. However, it's better to be safe to call your doctor if you're not sure. Birthing can take 1 to 24 hours, although we know that birthing can take up to 48 hours, but they're saying average. You have to be 10 centimeters dilated and 100% effaced, which means your cervix must be 10 centimeters wide now and thinned out 100%. Then that's when they can push. Stage 2 is when you start to see the infant's head. We call that crowning, and the delivery of the infant. Stage 3 is the delivery of the placenta. After the baby comes out, it is still attached by the umbilical cord to the placenta inside the mother. So then we have to deliver the placenta, and then the umbilical cord can be cut. And then stage 4 is not always put in some texts, but stage 4 is the recovery of the mother and breastfeeding. They want the child or the baby to breastfeed as soon as possible, because that actually stimulates hormones in the mother to recover and to shrink the uterus back down. So that's an important phase too. So I just put this little figure up here. Just it helps, you remember the stages of labor. And then the last thing that I talk about in your book is menopause, because older women will often go through menopause, and that is when your menstruation stops. Typically occurs when you're over 40. It is associated with symptoms soon after your ovaries stop working. So women will complain about a lot of symptoms in menopause. And I put this picture here because there's so many different things, but usually it's things like hot flashes, mood swings, chills, night sweats, often weight gain, things like that. Some women will actually undergo hormone replacement therapy because their symptoms are so bad, but hormone replacement therapy does come with risks. You are putting hormones in your body. And I think the biggest risk that people are worried about is triggering breast cancer, some kind of cancer. And actually, there's one more thing your book talks about, is multiples, twins, but multiples. So there are 2 different types of twins or multiples. One is identical, right? And that is where one sperm fertilizes one egg. And when that egg starts to, when those cells start to divide, somehow the egg actually splits into 2. So they have identical DNA. They came from one sperm and one egg, but the fertilized egg itself split in half. And so we have then 2 eggs that start to multiply, right? 2 eggs that multiply cells and they grow. So that's how you end up with identical twins. With fraternal twins, 2 eggs are released into the 2 eggs are released. This can happen randomly. It happens more when women are a little bit older, but it's not super abnormal to have more than 1 egg released. So if more than 1 egg is released, and we remember how many millions of sperm are released during ejaculation, we only need 1. So what happens is 2 eggs get fertilized. They are not the same DNA. They're coming from different sperm and different eggs. So they are technically twins, but they are called fraternal twins. And so I just wanted to show you some pictures of how a lot of fraternal twins can look very, very similar, even so much that people can't tell them apart. But we also can have fraternal twins that are male and female, right? Or these kids, they're adults now, they had mixed parents. And so one of the twins came out very light skin and light hair, while the other twin came out with much darker skin and hair, right? And so we can have things like that. And, these 2 were talking about how throughout life, they would tell people they're twins and everybody was like, okay, sure, but they are. So, and that is the end of this chapter. Please let me know if you have any questions.